All right, let's jump right into this explainer of Surah 58, which is conventionally known as Al-Mujadilah. We're going to examine this ancient text through a really fascinating, highly structural lens today. Basically, we're going to translate its ancient linguistic roots into a very modern framework, one of systems, data logging, and ultimate cosmic accountability.
We have to start with this wild question, because this framework masterfully scales up what seems like a tiny, micro-level human dispute into a massive macro-level systemic protocol. It literally asks us to consider how our everyday interpersonal conflicts don't just, vanish into thin air, but actually generate real data that requires a direct operational response from the universe itself. So to unpack all of this, we're going to follow a pretty straightforward roadmap. We'll kick things off with the microcatalyst, trace speech as a cosmic record, navigate evidence versus blindness, move into regulating subversion, and then finally land at ultimate systemic alignment in Section 5.
Okay, Section 1, the microcatalyst or a breach in the domestic contract. Let's look at the inciting incident here, which is a woman seeking justice for her husband's distorted legal oath, a practice historically known as zihar.
The Arabic root at play here is dod-hr. Now, across the text, this root doesn't just mean physical backs. It signifies backing, visibility, or dominance. In the context of this specific domestic dispute, a husband used an archaic, harmful vocal oath to effectively leave his spouse completely trapped in legal limbo. And it wasn't just a rude comment, right? Through the structural lens we're using, this false oath is essentially an attempt to hack the social framework using an arbitrary assertion of dominance. It's a legal distortion that totally destabilizes domestic security, and frankly, the system just cannot allow that to stand.
Right, moving to Section 2, speech as cosmic record, logging data into the system. This intimate dispute triggers our next big theme, because the system steps in to correct the injustice, and by doing so, it reveals exactly how individual speech is processed by the universal system.
The narrative explicitly states that God hears her complaint, but it uses the Arabic root SMA. This absolutely does not mean passive, background listening. It is the active capacity to receive, register, and integrate transmitted reality. Her testimony isn't just floating around in the ether somewhere, it is officially registered into the cosmic data log. God has actively received and documented her speech, which means her complaint now has official standing within the accountability structure of the universe.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept of call, or speech. Every single statement made between parties is a binding input. Speech is not just wind leaving your mouth. If your speech misrepresents reality, like that false domestic oath we just talked about, it creates actual, measurable instability within the entire system. It breaks that absolutely crucial correspondence between what is said and what is fact.
To put that into perspective, if we crunch the numbers on how often these roots appear across the text, it's incredibly revealing. QWL, or speech as an input, appears an overwhelming 171 times. SMA, active registration, pops up 47 times, so speech and hearing are, by far, the most dominant operational functions of this network. We are seeing, mathematically and structurally, that what you input into the system through speech and how the system registers it is literally the foundation of cosmic accountability.
Okay, Section 3, evidence versus operational blindness, navigating the system with proof. Let's see how this builds into the absolute necessity of verifying your data before you try contesting the system.
So the crucial point here is this strict juxtaposition. You're basically operating in one of two states. You either operate with bayina, which is standing clear evidence. We're talking objective proof embedded in the cosmic order, not just your personal guesswork. Or you suffer from jahal. Now, jahal isn't just innocent ignorance. Actually, scratch that. It's not ignorance at all. It is operational blindness. It's a willful disengagement from the system's logic. If you are in a state of jahal, you literally cannot perceive the clear evidence, simply because you've unplugged yourself from the verification process.
And what happens when you operate with that blindness? Well, you generate khilaf, from the root kulf. This is systemic fragmentation. When you oppose the system or even your community without bayina, without that clear evidence, your opposition acts as a destructive bug within the governance structure. This kind of disagreement isn't some healthy debate. It's a breach of structural unity driven entirely by personal desire or a deliberate cover-up of the truth. It fractures the whole system.
Moving right along to Section 4, regulating subversion and assembly, network security and public space. Here, the text zooms out from the individual's blindness to the regulation of covert networks.
This framework totally exposes secret assemblies. It emphatically points out that every private council is tracked, logged, and assessed by the central authority. You might think your whispered, secret meetings are completely off the grid, but the text assures us that the ultimate systemic authority is always the fourth in any secret meeting of three. It's the ultimate network security protocol, for sure.
And the structural framework sets up another brilliant contrast here. On one side, you've got NJW, secret, subversive networks that generate friction and hide reality. And on the flip side, you have FSH, which is the command to dynamically create space in assemblies. When you are told to make space in a gathering, it's not just polite party etiquette, It is physical and intellectual coordination that expands systemic capacity. Secret plotting constricts the system, but making space and showing operational order allows the entire system to breathe, grow, and sustain its upright framework. Finally, Section 5, the ultimate systemic alignment, restoring the system. Let's explore the macro-level conclusion here, how the system resolves these errors, everything from that initial domestic dispute to secret subversion, and achieves absolute structural peace. So, if a breach has occurred, how do you recover your operational standing? Well, we're given a very strict three-step troubleshooting protocol. Step 1, the issue must be registered within the system. That's SME. Step 2, you must perfectly realign your speech with actual reality, restoring the qual hoc concordance. And Step 3, reentrance into verified conviction and aligned action. That's Iman and Amal. You can't just say I'm sorry and move on. You have to structurally realign your inputs to match the cosmic order. When you successfully execute that recovery, or if you never strayed from the system's logic to begin with, it results in KTB. This Arabic root signifies a binding prescription. When you combine that with true conviction, it means that systemic alignment becomes a fixed, immutable law, hard-coded into the psychology of the aligned collective. It is literally written into their very operating code.
Which leads us to this incredibly beautiful, definitive conclusion. This represents the ultimate, unyielding polarization. On one side, you have those who misuse speech, create fragmentation, and end up structurally separated and diminished. But on the exact opposite side are those described right here. Individuals whose internal conviction is securely and permanently written into their very hearts, sustained by an underlying systematic spirit. They have achieved absolute structural victory.
Which leaves us with something pretty heavy to think about today. We've seen how a single false word in a living room scales all the way up to trigger a universal data logging event. So take a hard look at your own inputs. Does your everyday speech perfectly align with reality, or is it secretly generating a cosmic system error? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep your inputs aligned.